Hello, this is Michael Swain, Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa for SA, speaking with our Head of Legal, Mrs. Liesel Pretorius. And this week, we're going to be discussing a debate that took place in Parliament, initiated by the ACDP, which highlighted two legislative processes that are underway at the World Health Organization. Now, you might wonder, what is this all about? Who are the World Health Organization? Why should this affect us? Well, listen up, because if what they require or what they're hoping for is passed in its current form, this will potentially have the opportunity to fundamentally impact the daily lives, specifically the rights and freedoms of every South African citizen in the event, of course, a future pandemic. So, Liesel, let's get underway. Maybe give us some background. Who are the WHO and what is their role in health policies in the nations of the world?
Thank you, Michael. The World Health Organization is an international body set up under the auspices of the United Nations. They're based in Geneva, Switzerland, and they are run by officials who are unaccountable, unelected, and who enjoy diplomatic immunity and are even tax exempt. Now, it's
Mm.
important to note that member states are not the only ones who contribute to the WHO's funding. Significant donors or donations rather are received from major pharmaceutical companies like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and from philanthropic organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, as such, there is obviously the potential for a vested interest to unduly influence the global policies of the WHO. Now, across the globe, strong voices are speaking up against how the WHO managed and, according to them, mismanaged the COVID-19 pandemic. And in light of this, it is a major and current concern that the WHO is now seeking a major expansion of its powers. It seems that rather than taking responsibility for its mistakes, the WHO is rather blaming the mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic on having insufficient power to implement health policies and other strategies.
Yeah, always the concern, of course, is if you pay the piper, you call the tune, as you said. So follow the money is what we often say. But tell us then, so what now is happening that will give the WHO greater powers in the future?
Well, there's a proposed new pandemic accord or treaty, and there's also proposed amendments to the international health regulations. And these will significantly strengthen the authority of the WHO to direct and coordinate the international response to global and regional public health threats. Now, across the globe, concerns are being raised in that the net effect of these two documents will be to create a legal and financial basis for the emergence of an elaborate internationally coordinated biosurveillance regime, which may ultimately have a massively detrimental impact on religious freedom and various other civil liberties, and even, this is quite concerning, the sovereignty of nation states.
So, yeah, we've been following for SA this for a while now. And maybe you could just jog us through the main concerns that we have. Uh, is this not simply a matter of trying to ensure that we have better health outcomes?
Well, we're all in favor of better health outcomes, Michael, but as we often say, the devil's in the details. And we always should look at loopholes and how documents can be abused for nefarious purposes. So, the most problematic aspect of the new pandemic treaty, combined with the amendments to the international health regulations, is that they undermine the sovereignty of nation states. Now, national sovereignty, in simple terms, is a country's ability to make its own decisions autonomously for its own territory without being influenced by or dictated to by external entities. And one of the amendments proposed will be a very wide definition of public health emergency of international concern, abbreviated as PHEIC or PHEIC. And that this will include even potential, not real, but potential health emergencies. So the WHO will no longer need to seek agreement from relevant member states concerning whether a health related event is indeed a public health emergency and of international or regional concern. Now, the Director General of the WHO's powers will be significantly expanded so that he or she has the power to unilaterally declare a public health emergency of international concern or FIC, even against member states' wishes and even against the advice of his or her own advisory committee. And once a DG has declared a FAQ, he or she can issue immediate mandatory instructions to member states on how they should respond and to which they must comply, whether they agree with these that the event is actually a fake or not, and whether they agree with the instructions. So this effectively does override state sovereignty, which will have vast socioeconomic and human rights implications, affecting bodily autonomy. For example, if vaccinations should be made mandatory, freedom of movement and association, thinking about vaccine passports, lockdowns, even freedom of trade, even property rights. So, although the WHO has given assurances that nation state sovereignty will be respected, if you examine the overall effect of the amendments of the international health regulations and what is being proposed in the pandemic treaty, it will fundamentally change the role of the WHO and expand its power significantly. It will basically no longer be a body making recommendations and giving advice, but it will be empowered to issue orders that must be followed by member states. And this will enable the WHO to override member states' decisions concerning health measures taken in their own sovereign territory, so that the WHO and not sovereign states have the final say. So this is quite concerning. But Michael, how is this likely to practically impact on South Africans' daily lives should we face another pandemic?
Well, the answer, of course, would be fundamentally, because we just have to remember what happened during COVID-19. In some cases, our lives were not just disrupted, but permanently disrupted. We lost the majority of our constitutionally guaranteed rights and freedoms. We should never forget that we were forbidden to worship together in person. We were practically locked up in our houses. We were absurdly restricted in what we could buy or sell. Do you remember the curfews that we faced? Hundreds of thousands of businesses were forced to close. Unemployment has climbed as a consequence to disastrously record highs. And of course, let's not forget the corruption that stole much of the pandemic aid and the 500,000 people or thereabouts who were arrested under these lockdown regulations, and many of whom now have permanent criminal records. There was then the massive push for mandatory vaccinations, and of course, the safety and effectiveness of them. They're preventing the spread of COVID or even protecting you from being infected has obviously come under serious scrutiny. So, in light of this, there's a particularly disturbing element in the revised international health regulations, which say that the WHO will no longer be guided by, and I quote, the full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. It's almost hard to imagine how any sane or reasonable person could justify removing guiding principles like protecting human dignity, human rights, and fundamental human persons from health regulations. Instead, what they're asking for is in their actions is that this will now be based on principles of equity, inclusivity, and coherence based upon member states' socioeconomic development. But of course, this implies some sort of hierarchy of rights, which is completely out of place when you're talking about health, because health affects every single person, regardless of who you are, ethnicity, whatever it might happen to be. And of course, we also must remember that these rights are fundamentally guaranteed in law by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and, of course, by the South African Constitution.
Yes, it's very important to remember that these rights have to remain protected, irrespective of any new pandemic treaty or amendment to health regulations or public health emergencies, real or otherwise. But Michael, the type of powers that the WHO will have, if it exercises its authority under this proposed new, public health emergency of international concern or FAKE, what are these, and how will they impact the daily lives of South Africans?
Yeah, it's good to step back and take a moment to think, what would it be like if this thing goes through? The WHO, which, as we said, is an unaccountable international organization, will have the power and authority in South Africa to require medical examinations and proof of vaccinations. They will be able to implement contact tracing. They will be able to force you into quarantine and even prescribe mandatory treatment. They also, very concerning, want to have the power to censor what they consider to be misinformation or disinformation, and even to conduct surveillance. Of course, that's very concerning because that means that no other views other than their views will ever be heard by anybody. And they can even, as you alluded to earlier, seize property, particularly intellectual property, and the products and means of production. Think specifically of vaccine. So we need to ask some really, really good questions. Because, for example, if they do get what they want, will citizens be able to refuse vaccinations or medical treatment or being traced? Will they be forced into self-isolation, quarantine, detained against their will? Will they be restricted from traveling abroad or even locally? And what about the right of religious persons who conscientiously object to getting vaccines? Will that be respected? Will unvaccinated persons be barred from travel? Will they lose their jobs? Will faith communities be precluded by the threat of criminal sanction, as was the case the last time, from gathering to worship and fellowship? And will we be censored and our freedom of expression curtailed because the WHO now decides what is true and what is false? So very, very concerning regulations all round, really dystopian. So, Liesl, maybe just let us know, what is the current status there of these negotiations? Where to from here?
Well, the WHO wants both the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations to be finalized in time for this year's World Health Assembly, which is basically their parliament. And the World Health Assembly for this year is scheduled for 27 May to 1 June 2024, really around the corner. Assuming the amendments are approved by a simple majority vote of the delegates, they will be considered fully ratified 12 months after that, unless a head of state formally rejects them with the designated opt-out period, which also has been reduced from 18 to 10 months. So in other words, the revisions to the international health regulations can pass by default rather than formal acceptance of heads of state, which is very concerning. The silence of heads of state will be construed as consent, and it makes it all the easier for these revised international health regulations to pass without proper legislative scrutiny and without a proper public debate in the states that are subject and will be affected by this new legal framework. And on the other hand, the pandemic treaty requires a two-thirds majority vote in the World Health Assembly and must be signed by a nation's head of state. The South African Constitution provides that the negotiating and signing of all international agreements is the responsibility of the national executive. And the Constitution further requires that an international agreement, for example, the pandemic treaty or amended international health regulations, only binds the Republic after it has been approved by both houses of Parliament. So, during the parliamentary debate that you mentioned, the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Dlomu, confirmed that any agreement must first be domesticated into South African law. So that's a positive thing there. And that any amendments will therefore be subject to parliamentary approval. And several political parties, including the ACDP and Freedom Front Plus, emphasize that when this happens, a robust public participation process is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and that was the good bit of news at the end of this debate, because clearly we, 4SA, will be tracking this closely. Clearly, it does have significant potential implications for religious freedom. And we will, of course, be letting you, our constituency, those who are watching, to know what is going on, so that when the time comes, we absolutely will need to make sure that our voices are heard. So in the meantime, please do follow us. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website. You can obviously go to our Freedom of Religion SA Facebook page. You can also go to this YouTube channel and subscribe there so that you don't miss any of our updates. And please do consider how you can support 4SA financially. We can only stay on the front lines of faith and freedom if you support us with your finances and your donations. So thank you for this. And until the next time, we're standing with you for faith and freedom. This is Michael Swain of 4SA. Remember to like and share this video, and then click on the subscribe button to make sure that you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.